I have an amazing guest to introduce to you, Steena Marie Brown, a sexual empowerment coach who believes that your sexual issues are spiritual issues and that your child's behavior is a mirror. As a mom, Steena realized that power struggles are an illusion. She and her children can be in power together. Steena is the author of Worship Her, a dynamic book about sexuality and how it expresses who you are and influences the way you connect with others. Welcome, Steena.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda.
Absolutely. It's always fun to talk to you. We go crazy together, don't we? We worked on this book together and everything. It's just been so much fun to have you in my life. You did the cover of my book, Wine-Free Kids, Wine-Free Parents, Successful Patterns for Learning. And I'm just so happy to have you as a business bestie.
Absolutely.
All righty. Is there anything you'd like to open with about your book or?
Oh, I'll just say it was quite the birth.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that, all the moms listening can resonate with that. Just that, birthing something takes so much work. And it's also that feeling of, I just have to get this out there in the world. This book has a mission.
Right.
And now it's out there doing that mission. It's like my little legs out into the world. And so I'm excited to share a little bit of that with your lovely ladies today.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's start with your sexuality. You have so much to say, and the way you think about everything is like super interesting. So do you want to just open on, the concept of a person's sexuality?
Yeah. So the way that I define sexuality is who you are and how you relate to others.
Okay.
And, usually we think of sexuality as just being sex. Who we're sexual with and maybe our sexual orientation or gender identity, like all of those things are kind of what we think of sexuality as in kind of pop culture.
Right.
But when we actually look at our sexuality, it's something that's individual and unique to each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we learn about our sexuality, I think the more we learn who we truly are. And we learn how we express ourselves and how we connect to other people. And so it's a really beautiful journey of self-awareness and self-discovery and learning to, open ourselves to receiving. And there's so many layers and facets to explore. It's juicy.
Yeah, I love some of the concepts you have on receiving and how the woman, the vessel of the woman, can you say a little bit about that? Because you just had such a big aha moment yourself as you were writing the book.
Yeah. So the feminine is all about, we hear the feminine is all about receiving. And I kind of take it to the next level and say that the feminine is actually consuming. And so there's a lot of power when you think of consuming something, it's taking it in and it's that kind of satiated and like full feeling.
Right.
And the feminine is all about substance and being nurtured. And it's not always just like a passive, I'm just going to wait for somebody else to give it to me.
Right.
But it's that drawing in and that receiving, allowing ourselves to create in that way. So, the feminine, that's how we take in sperm. It's like, it comes into our bodies, we kind of consume that, and that's what plants, a seed into the fertile womb. So there's always this dance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that sometimes when we talk about receiving, it can feel almost a little bit victim-y still, where we're waiting for other people to do something for us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think really shifting that into like an empowered receiving with this idea of the feminine being this all-consuming force is quite powerful.
Yeah, I love it. And the work that you do with women in that pelvic bowl area is so powerful. And I've noticed like the young girls will go out to the bar and they'll just push all kinds of energy out from there, and then just like fly paper, guys will stick to it and they'll reel them in. And it's like, that's what girls do. A real woman works on herself, especially pleasuring herself and just healing that whole pelvic bowl area, because a lot happens to us throughout our feminine lives, that's for sure. And you've been practicing it, and me too. And it's like our husbands are going, oh, you look sexy today, honey. Or, just even in a coffee shop, men are approaching you, just to have a conversation. And you even had some issues with that, like, oh, I'm married, I can't flirt, right? I've flirt all my life. So the crone got a few things on that.
And I'll say even to that, with women, like women are attracted as well to that energy, to the grounded, really, it's not just confidence. It's like, the next level of confidence, I think, is embodiment. Yes. So it's when you're actually embodied and fully present. That's a huge piece of it. If you're fully present with somebody, you attract a different type of person. And what I found, and I repeat this over and over to people, I say, people vet themselves out of my life. There are people that cannot handle the level of presence that I am, just by being who I am, just by doing the inner work, by embodying my sexuality. It's like they can't handle a woman who is free, a woman who can make her own choices, a woman who has her mind set and isn't going to waver or apologize or beg or look for permission or be owned. And so that goes for attracting men or even female friendships, or a mentor, or somebody to offer you an opportunity to speak somewhere, like attracting any of that. They're all people. And, when you really step into that and embody your sexuality, people notice on a subconscious level, and the types of opportunities and the types of people that show up in your life just are different. And there's a lot of people that will just kind of ignore you. And it's not because you're not showing up, and it's not because you're like invisible. It's almost like you're just operating on completely different planes of reality.
I hear you. I love it. And so, we talked about not bound to a moral box, like it's okay to talk to a guy in a coffee shop, right? It's okay to flirt. So what else do you mean by not bound by a moral box?
Yeah, so I think what you just brought up is really, a lot of women experience restriction and fear around being attractive, around being alluring, around, I don't think there's very many women who really understand like just how beautiful and just how attractive they are. And not just on a physical level, but the magnetism, of a woman. And we're taught that that's dangerous. Like it's dangerous to attract people. And, you're kind of like leading them on, or you might be giving them ideas, or you're, silently giving them permission to do something just by showing up in a certain way. And that's where like rape culture comes from, where it says, well, look what she was wearing, or look where she was, or what she was doing, or who she was with. And it's like, I don't care if you're naked in bed with somebody. If you say no, it means no. So we just have all these ideas about what it means to receive attention, what it means to have chemistry with someone. And it's all a choice. You can have chemistry with someone and choose to do nothing with it, or you can have chemistry with someone and choose to explore it. And that's just what it is a choice. So going around feeling like we have to constantly turn ourselves off and, dim our shine and kind of like cover up, whether that's like emotionally or physically, and kind of like keep ourselves safe. The more that we do that, the more we turn ourselves off, and we get in the habit of being turned off. So that when we are with our partner or we're intimate, we have a hard time turning it back on because we've spent so long in the turned off state.
Wow, such a good point. I love that. Okay, and then really tapping into who you are. I know, like in human design, I rode in on a vehicle not knowing who I am, so I took all these tests, and I'm an INTJ, and I'm a this, and I have recognition, in the core passion assessment, and if you had an assessment, I was all over it, and it's really not about that. It's about loving yourself, and it's about really getting down into that pelvic bowl, as you explain it, and doing the work there. It's that full embodiment, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the identity. I think identity is something that you feel more than you can, put into a list of descriptors.
Mhm. And you love my quote. You even have it in the book. See if I can remember it. Money is a relative sign of full embodiment, I believe. Yeah, and it's true because, like, whew, that's that second chakra. That's my book, Sex, Money, and Power, the second chakra.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
All right. And so how you relate to others, especially children. I would love to get into that child conversation, because that sexual energy is that receiving and, and then the penetrating into someone's world, of conversation and really listening and hearing what they have to say, and right, and penetrating is like giving your point, and then receiving is really hearing their point, right? And in neurodevelopment, we talk about, the concept of it's really a neurodevelopmental skill. Your thoughts, my thoughts, our thoughts. And that's where so many marriages and parent-child relationships get in big trouble, because it's everything's like being reacted to. And it's like, no, these are my thoughts. No reaction to them. Put them in the center. These are my thoughts. No reaction to them. Put them in the center. Now we know where each other is in their head, and we get to tweak and adjust and get them to realize, maybe, like, no, that wasn't my intention, or that's no, I understand you received it that way, that wasn't how I intended it, right? And have those really healthy conversations is huge. All right, so your sex life is your life. Wake up call, right? Even like the bedroom is a mirror. Okay, so let's jump in there.
Yeah. So I'll just share a little bit of like a personal experience with, something that will probably pertain to a couple of different points that we have on this slide. But the bedroom is as a mirror. It's like whatever is going on between you and your partner, there's usually almost always broader implications for that. So, just if you're plainly like just resisting intimacy, just not interested, not in the mood kind of a thing, then that's a mirror for something that's going on deeper than just, oh, my libido is tanked, or I'm tired, or whatever. I'm looking at that, like looking at the libido as more than just if I want sex, but really like the libido that you have for life. Where is it in your life that you're just like kind of things feel mediocre? You just kind of feel like I'm not in the mood for like anything exciting. Like, when you think about sex, like good sex and good orgasms and wonderful, like times you've had wonderful experiences of pleasure and ecstasy, it's interesting that we would resist that. Right? Like on a logical level, something that feels so good and so deeply connects you to another person and yourself would seem like something that you would just like, yeah, sign me up for more of that. But there's all these kind of emotional blocks and physical blocks that can come in the way of that. And so when that comes up in the bedroom, it's really apparent. It's very clear, what part of your body you're feeling tension in, where you're kind of holding back, or maybe a specific thing your partner did that triggered you. Yeah. And then you get to look at, what's really underneath that. So, yeah.
Very cool. All right. And so let's talk about sexual energy. What are your thoughts on sexual energy?
Well, you've mentioned, getting into the pelvic bowl area, and that's the sacral chakra and the root chakra are both where we hold our sexual energy. And sexual energy is all about feeling safe, or the root energy is about feeling safe, and the sacral energy is a little more about creativity. And so there's also a tie from that root and sacral up through the throat. And I talk about this a lot in my teaching, how the cervix specifically is connected to the throat. So when we have trauma, sexual trauma, then that results in energetic and emotional trauma to our throat, where we don't feel safe expressing our truth, and we don't feel safe expressing our creativity. So even if your creativity isn't like singing or speaking, the throat is still that area of expression. And so there's the sexual energy, essentially like channel, comes up from that deep place in the body where we kind of have to release it from, allow it to flow from, and then it comes up through the body for expression. And it's kind of this like fiery energy that comes up through. But like we're talking about, issues in the bedroom, if there's, a block, say around your breasts, like I've had some trauma with my daughter. I had nursing trauma where, she quit nursing really early and she bit me, and it was like, a really long drawn out struggle. And so that's been an area that I've had to do a lot of work around, especially recently, of releasing residual trauma. She's 4.5 years old. I mean, this isn't recent, but these things come up when you're finally like ready to handle it and ready to deal with it. And so there's just different areas that in your body that you can have these kind of like you're holding back. And the breasts, for me, it's like, holding my heart kind of closed because I'd rather like feel protected than be vulnerable. And the breasts, it's like, brings up a feeling of like just being drained. Everybody's taken everything from me. I've, pumped myself dry for this baby. I'm just poured out and I have nothing left. And so in order to make sure that I have something left for myself, shut the energy down, just don't let it flow out. And so it's, there's things like this in motherhood, birth trauma, nursing trauma, that come up that affect the way that sexual energy flows through our body.
Yeah. And, you trained as a doula, so it's always fascinating to, hear your different connections with things like, we've studied women who run with the wolves together, and really the breast, the nipples are the eyes, like the eyes to our soul. Right. Yeah. And are like, they're intuitive, like watching out for the narcissist or whatever, that it's just kind of fascinating studying all that. And then what really surprised me was that the tissue of the vagina is pretty much looks like the muscular structure, whatever, of the throat. It's that, you talk about lips to lips communication. That's what you're alluding to here too. It's just so
full body communication.
I love it. Okay, so your sexual issues are spiritual issues. So how's that?
Yeah, so let's see, kind of like going off of what we've, talked about, like with resistance to intimacy. I couldn't get those words out. Resistance to intimacy or something like nursing trauma, around the breasts. Those things come up as sexual issues, but they're not necessarily fixed by sex. It's not a mechanics issue. It's not always a hormonal issue. It can definitely be a hormonal issue as well. But, there's physical things, but the spiritual issue is connecting with really our own divinity, right? And that, like you said, the sacral, the seat of the soul. We've talked about identity. And what I find is that the more fully I am embodied in myself, that's where true spirituality comes from, is from that self-awareness and embodiment. And you'll know that you're feeling that when you stop apologizing for yourself, when you stop saying yes to everything and you allow yourself to say no without feeling guilty. Guilt is a big one. So, when you're in that place, there's not this feeling of guilt for wanting pleasure, or guilt for wanting time for yourself, or guilt for investing in friendships and relationships. There's so much that as mothers that we struggle with around that. Mm-hmm. And so those, the sexual issues, the intimate resistance, the parts of our body that we're holding tension or trauma, looking at that and saying, how is this disconnecting me from myself? Instead of like, this is about my partner, or this is about, the act of sex, or something's wrong here. Right. Actually going within and looking at how that's disconnecting us from, our inner divinity, from our higher self. However you kind of connect with that, there's always a correlation.
Yeah. And in America, especially, I mean, the European women, they know how to pleasure themselves, and they know that you don't need a man. In fact, you can get off on your own pleasuring probably more than a guy can get you off. So, and how important that is for creativity and just like that, running that sexual energy that even brings clients to you, brings money to you. It's just, you just glow when you're happy. In the household, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy on top of it. So
yeah, right.
Okay, now we're getting into communication and how it translates. So first of all, like, your child's behavior is actually a mirror. And, you know, that was something that I mean, it all makes sense, but it wasn't something that I really tapped into actually until this year. And you are very good at spotting that and explaining that. So maybe you even have some examples.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, there's an abundance of examples, right? But even in the last few days, always examples. With our kids, you know, kids don't have the kind of filters that we have. So that's why kids throw tantrums and they, you know, do things that seem really irrational, because they don't have the cultural filters of, it's not appropriate behavior, you shouldn't express yourself that way, or that's not okay. And so when our kids do something that feels uncomfortable to us, it's always a chance for us to look at what's actually going on. And what I've experienced even this week is, like, you know, yesterday I sat on the couch with my daughter and she was watching a couple shows and I was reading a book, but I was just holding her. And it was just so important for her. I could just feel in her body, you know, like this gratitude for just being with mom. And you know, I was laughing at the show a little bit and she just really appreciated that time. But that was also, I felt like her kind of calling me into slowing down, you know, and she's been kind of impatient the last few days and like repeating questions, not listening to people talking to her. And so when that happens, looking at, you know, where is she not feeling seen and heard herself? So, you know, kids that are doing things that get your attention when it's negative, it's, you know, looking at where are they not really feeling nourished? Where are they not feeling like they're really getting my attention? And it doesn't have to be like for a long time. And I think, you know, you've taught me this as well, that when you're with your kids, the quality of time matters so much more than the quantity of time. So spending, you know, 30 minutes or an hour, which for me, like a solid hour fully spent with my kids is so rejuvenating for all of us. Like whether we're playing a game together or I take them out to a coffee shop and we're coloring, or, you know, just, it can be really simple, but just that one chunk of time means so much more to them than if I'm spending a day with them, like running around the house cleaning and stressed out about dinner and, you know, like trying to work and then also be with them. Like it doesn't have the same effect.
It's a different energy, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and dating your children is so important too, and especially like you and I did too. My kids were really close in age, you know, just less than 2 years apart were mine. So how about yours? How far apart are your kids?
Just over 2 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and man, some days, you know, it felt like having twins. In fact, they'd be like in growth spurts, they'd end up being the same height, and yeah, so getting them apart from each other. And we even sometimes just had a rule at the house, like boys play upstairs, girls play down. We had friends over because it was this constant battling with each other. It's just my love set her off, and she was alpha, so she'd take it just so long, then she'd cream him. Oh my goodness. So we've talked a lot about listen to your womb. It's basically like listening to your intuition. Although there is a lot of work in that pelvic bowl, and just moving your hips is like huge for just kind of lighting you up, and it shows in your face. And when you do work in that area, I mean, I remember doing something with a group of women and coming home, and my husband just like did a double take, and I was absolutely glowing, you know? And so like when you're pregnant, there is a lot going on down there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're glowing. Well, you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
be pregnant to glow.
Mm-hmm.
So between pleasuring yourself and really, you know, moving your hips and dancing and just really doing that type of inner work is amazing
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
for health.
Yeah. And, listening to your womb, like you mentioned pregnancy, that's the time when like it's just not optional for most of us. You're tired, you're craving things, you're going to doctor's appointments and, having ultrasounds and listening to the baby's heartbeat, and you can't really ignore it so much. You have a swelling womb and it's very apparent and there's a wiggly baby in it. And so it's a great opportunity for us to start to tune into that when we are pregnant. But then it can be really easy, like we talked about before, turning yourself off, that we do that to repel energy that we're afraid of, like from other men. But also we can do that when we're around our kids, because we get into go mode and we get into, got to get things done, got to be here, got to go there. And that rush energy is all, anxiety in the chest. It's not like an embodied, like deep thing. And so when you actually just take a moment to breathe and breathe deep down into your pelvic bowl and just asking yourself, what does my womb want? Or what does my pussy want? What does my vagina want? Like just listening, just purely being present with yourself. And it doesn't have to take a long time. It's just literally one breath, feeling in and letting yourself listen. Yeah. And that's enough to kind of break that cycle of hustle and go and, do, and just get you present and, bring up what you really should be doing.
I know. And again, it's a push energy and your kids feel it. They feel pushed.
Yes.
They literally feel pushed and they're going to push back. And if you have with, attention deficits, I mean, they don't know really who they are either, and so things have to be fast moving or angry. So they are going to push up against you so that they know who they are, and because they haven't like separated almost,
Yeah.
The brain isn't as hooked up, and it can be. There's lots of cool things that you can do. Okay, so in communication with your child, so you were talking about just holding your daughter and really being fully present with her. And tell us a little bit more, because people, you do this so naturally that people go, I can't believe what you just said to her or him, and that was so cool. And they like want you to teach them how to talk to the kids, because they're so responsive. And it's so cool what you said. And it's not baby talk and it's not talking down to them. It's very respectful, and it's very much you as a facilitator rather than you as a dictator, So fill us in a little bit.
Well, I was just thinking of a fun story that I think illustrates this point well.
You have some good ones.
I know. I do think that I do. So it was actually when we were visiting your family in Asheville, and we were downtown, and there was a couple of people that were getting into a pretty heated conversation, to say the least, on the street, and they kept walking away from each other and yelling louder and louder. And so they're, one corner to the next corner in the city, shouting at each other, all manner of profanity. Yeah. And I
illness in that conversation.
I tend to keep myself moderately tame around my kids. I'm not like, oh, I have to I can't say anything. It's just I try to keep it like PG, PG-13.
They've heard stuff.
This was right. So they've heard things, but this was like, it was a very angry exchange, and these people were shouting names at each other, and you couldn't even tell what the conversation was pertaining to at all.
Nope.
And so, we just kind of ushered the kids into the next store, and they were kind of amused with what was in the store. But then later in the car, my son said, Mommy, what words were those people saying when they were out in the street? It was like he couldn't quite process like what they had been talking about. And I said, well, let me ask you this. What do you think they were feeling towards each other?
Nice.
And, what was the energy that was in that exchange? And he said, they seemed really angry. And I said, yeah. So I said, the words that they were using were some different words, but do you think that like the words that they were using mattered more, or the way that they were talking to each other?
Nice.
And he was like, the way they were talking to each other, because he was able to then recognize that, I mean, they could have been shouting cotton candy at each other, but it would have felt the same if it had that toxic anger, that they were just throwing back and forth, back and forth.
Right.
And so instead of bringing his attention to like, oh, they shouldn't have been using those words in the street, it's like, they shouldn't have been talking to each other like that. And, it's the tone and like the way that those people were treating each other and the emotion of it. And that's really what I wanted him to see. And then it was really cool because a couple days later, we came out of the bowling alley. It was like 4:00 in the afternoon. And there was a group of people that had obviously been having a pretty good time in the middle of the day at the bowling alley. And we're getting into the car. And one of the people like bends over and grabs his knees and is like, oh, I can't remember what he said, dropped an F-bomb and, this and that. And there was one woman who was clearly like the designated driver and was sober. And she looks at me and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. And those people, they were just laughing and having a good time. They weren't bothering anybody. Nobody was being rowdy or anything. It was 4:00 at the bowling alley on like a Thursday. So, so we got in the car and my son's like, Mom, roll the window down. I want to hear what they're saying. Like, he's like so intrigued. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. But are you just curious what words they're using? Because it sounds different. And he said, yeah. And I reminded him of the situation on the street in Asheville. And I said, do you remember those people? I said, you know what? They're actually using some of the same words. And he was kind of like, huh. And I said, but how are those people acting? And he said, kind of silly.
It's probably more drawn to
kind of silly.
words too.
Yeah. And so it was just, I thought, how cool. I mean, within, a week or so that both of these events transpired, and I felt like provided such a beautiful, like, teaching opportunity for me to show him that, the words that we use, while important, intentionally choosing the words that we use is so important.
Yeah.
But specifically around swearing, it's like, I swear, and I don't ever swear at someone. I don't ever swear in anger towards someone or call them a name, but it's part of our language. And I don't want them to grow up thinking that, oh, that's bad. And we can't do that, because it's just not true. It's just not the case as an adult.
Oh.
And so what I wanted them to see, though, was that communication and how the people were communicating and how that felt different, because that's what they're going to learn from, is the tone and the actions of those people.
Right.
And it wasn't giving them like a list of rules. Don't say this word, because then they're just going to say it.
They are. Yeah. And
Mom told me not to say that word, so it must be a good one.
I love the way you treat your kids, you don't should on them, or you don't even point out other people, that person shouldn't be doing this or shouldn't be doing that. You just go to that deeper place with them. And this is so cool.